Welcome, everyone, to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle sponsored on Saturdays at Still and Moving Center. Today, we're going to take a little deviation from our practice of reading the back cover of this year's almanac. There's a beautiful quote relevant to today's topic by Edward Bellamy, who's often thought of as a futuristic thinker. He wrote back in the 1800s. This particular passage came from a small essay that he didn't actually quite finish when I believe he was 23 years old. Cliff pointed it out to me when I was less than that age, and it was really a life transformative essay. So I am deeply indebted to this particular essay, so I can't wait to hear this read aloud. And Jade's going to start us off.
Thank you. A pledge of identity. There is a conscious solidarity of the universe towards the intuition of which we must struggle, that it may become to us not a logical abstraction, but a felt and living fact. As individuals, we shall never be complete. The completest man lacks the completion of the rest of the universe. Part, then, with the feeling of the externality to the universe, which coupled with the sense of utter ignorance and powerlessness, is so full of despair. Believe that your sympathy with infinite being, infinite extension, infinite variety is a pledge of identity. Above all, disabuse your mind of the notion that this life is essentially incomplete and preliminary in its nature and destined to issue in some final state. For this notion, there is no warrant in reason nor in proper interpretation of intuitions. Time is not a vestibule of eternity, but a part of it. We are now living our immortal lives. The present life is its own perfect consummation, its own reason and excuse. The life of infinite range that our intuitions promise us lies even now open round about us. The avenues leading to it, the vistas opening upon it, are those universal instincts that continually stir us, and which, if followed out, would lead us thither. It is our own dull lack of faith that causes us to regard them as no present, but only a future significance, that places our heaven ever in some dim land of tomorrow, instead of about us in the eternal present. Edward Bellamy.
Thank you very much for that reading. Shall I go ahead, Renee?
I think I'm going to have Cliff introduce you first, John.
Oh, okay. All right. Wonderful.
Which I do with great pleasure. Actually, I'm really looking forward to what John has to say on this challenging, difficult subject. John has been my friend and teacher for over 4 decades now. And I have learned so much being in his presence over this time. We actually worked together. I was his apprentice in a print shop that printed sacred many years, and he taught me a lot about the printing practice as well during that time. And so we spent a lot of time talking about high subjects. I think any subject that has to do with the deeper nature of nature or the deeper nature of human nature, John is all about it, whether it be religious, philosophic, or scientific. And he has a way of taking very challenging subjects and making them pretty accessible to me and the rest of us who maybe can't think quite as deeply as he does. So I'm really looking forward to what you have to say, John.
Thank you very much for that introduction, uh, Cliff. I appreciate it. And I remember well our many nights at the printing press, and very fond memories of that. So let's continue on with the thought of Bellamy, that where he says we are now living our immortal lives. So why is there such anxiety and distress in our lives if that's true? So what does it mean to say that? Well, I think Bellamy is addressing here the belief primarily in the West with its Judeo-Christian one life tradition that human life is a brief journey in the physical world to be followed by an eternity of what? Rest, heavenly orchestrals, maybe personal bliss, maybe meetings and fascinating conversations with long dead historical personages, maybe Shakespeare for some, Julius Caesar for others, and then no doubt Jeffrey Epstein for still others. No, this isn't what Bellamy nor a long lineage of spiritual teachers is talking about. They've all pointed to a conception of human life that is not, quote, episodic, that is, a life consisting of a series of loosely connected parts or events, but rather a life that involves an unbroken continuity that extends without limit, infinitely into the past, and equally without limit into the future. Let's think about that idea for a moment. You cannot logically hold that immortality only goes forward in time. That is, from this life forward, so-and-so became immortal. You have to account for what preceded this life. Where did that being come from? Did he just spring up from nothing like a volunteer plant and then become immortal at the end of this life? Was he created by some external being who somehow gave him only one life to attain to immortality? And what happens if he does not? Well, the idea that there is some aspect to our conscious life that never had a beginning and will never have an end is logically coherent, though it's difficult for our finite minds to grasp. Conscious life is infinite in extension in time, but actually it exists outside of time as it precedes the very existence of time. Theosophically, our deepest subjective nature is consciously immortal and lies outside of time. It is the timeless, the eternal spectator and perceiver who is unaffected by any of the changes that its projected ray that undergoes countless incarnations experiences. If it is timeless, it is also changeless. It is a consciousness marked by unbroken continuity, a continuity that is maintained throughout all of the millions of alternations between birth and a form, throughout the dissolution of those forms as the soul changes state, a change which we call death, through the after-death states, the bardo spoken of by the Buddhists, followed by a period of rest of short or long duration, and then the arrival of the time to take up the sacrificial dharmas of incarnation again. Clearly, we're not talking about the continuity of our personal consciousness here, as its continuity is illusory. It is constantly being interrupted and disrupted and broken up by all manner of events and influences. Its dominant concerns are, excuse me, largely captivated by alternations between pleasure and pain, fame and shame, gain and loss, all of which are evanescent and chaotic preoccupations that bind together the skandhas and color the composite vestures we inhabit. Whatever facsimile of continuity it does have is broken by death. As Professor Iyer, in an essay called Levels of Manifestation, says, all attempts on the personal plane to gain continuity are only shadowy reflections, a kind of imitative activity that draws fitfully from the true light of awareness of the immortal soul, but which has no chance to manifest continuously because of the overactive personal consciousness. One must see through this illusion at the core to dissociate from it. One must learn through asceticism in speech how one tends to use the personal pronoun, the I. One must see that most of what one views as oneself is merely a set of tendencies, and that by identifying with them, one has created a false I, unquote. The essential point here is that the personal consciousness cannot embrace a holistic perspective encompassing many lives, even though it has within it an element of the transcendent ray that is part of the immortal nature of man. The problem is that the personal consciousness is built upon the illusion of it being a separate being, separate from other humans, separate from the cosmos in which all the other beings surrounding one live. And as long as that delusive element of separateness remains dominant, a true sense of selfhood is not possible. This delusion is referred to in the Voice of the Silence and Buddhist texts as Adavada, the great dire heresy of separateness, which reflects the philosophic error of assuming that all one's tendencies, desires, and thoughts make up some kind of entity which is cohesive and persistent, and above all, quote, cut off from the rest of humanity. Philosophically, this is an illusion. There is no such entity, and no true sense of selfhood can be located in this aggregate of ever-changing and secondhand chaotic tendencies, unquote. The dispelling of the illusion of separateness needs a strong and uncompromising stand in our consciousness, and ultimately a readiness to plunge into the stream, like in the picture of the diver from the tomb of the diver in Pestum, Italy, from the 5th century BCE, that was in the email you received. The Voice of the Silent says, the pilgrim who would cool his weary limbs in running waters, yet dares not plunge for terror of the stream, risks to succumb from heat. So, like the diver from Pestum, we have to plunge into the inner stream of darkness to learn to dissociate from our manifesting persona, to live apart, however briefly, from our tendencies, our personal memories, our habits and associations, and all of the familiar 10,000 things, to learn to be comfortable in the darkness, and eventually learn to see in the darkness by creating our own light. Still, there is an element in personal consciousness which is rooted in the light of the higher reason, which itself is part of the divine nature within us, and which we strive to reflect in our lower natures. In the Pythagorean tradition, this endeavor was the work of philosophy, which is, in the words of Hierocles, the foremost commentator in the ancient world of this tradition, the purification and perfection of human nature. Its purification because it delivers it from the temerity and folly that proceed from matter, and because it disengages its affections from the mortal body, and its perfection because it makes it recover its original felicity by restoring it to the likeness of God, unquote. We should carefully note that the Pythagorean perspective casts the real human nature in the likeness of God, meaning the one self of all beings, and sees human imperfections as a result of the folly that proceeds from matter, that is, the distortions that have taken root in the vestures of incarnation due to the illusions and delusions resulting from the fall into matter of the divine ray. So Hierocles goes on to say that virtue and truth alone can operate these two things. Virtue by driving away the excess of the passions, and truth by dispelling the darkness of error and returning the divine form to such as are disposed to receive it. For this science, therefore, which ought to render us pure and perfect, it is good to have short and certain rules, as so many aphorisms of the art, that by their means we may arrive methodically and in due order at happiness, which is our only end, unquote. Here, Hierocles is referring to the golden verses of Pythagoras and pointing to the crucial role of both ethics and wisdom, virtue and truth, to effect the purification of the self so that it may return to its primal form of purity, innocence, and life, and, quote, happily attain to the divine resemblance. By divine resemblance, Hierocles is speaking in terms of man being the microcosm of the macrocosm, and especially the transformation of the human being to mirror both the purposes and the character of the divine prototype. So Professor Iyer speaks of this divine prototype, or higher self, if you will, as the eternal triadic monad of Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, the noumenal cause and silent watcher of its successive projections into the shadowy region of phenomenal change. He points out that the partial incarnation of the immortal monad in every personality is a sacrificial participation in the shadowy side of existence. It comes into every descent a luminous spark of the supernal light of compassionate awareness, thus endowing each of its lunar vestures with the personal prerogative of reflective consciousness, choice and discrimination, moral conscience, and responsibility. Thus, the entire journey of the immortal ego through all its phases during manvantaric life is for the sake of sacrifice, as all self-consciousness is essentially ethical. Put in theosophical terminology, that would mean that the root of our personal self-consciousness, the higher manas, is a vehicle for the light of the Atman, which suffuses the entire cosmos. And that itself is a manifestation of that supernal light, radiating through Buddhi, which is the source of the universal love and compassion exemplified by the Buddhas. The gap between the head and the heart on the lower plane results from a misidentification with a separative self and can only be corrected through identification with that one self of all, which is the root of all beings and all consciousness. Everything depends upon the development of true self-consciousness, the divine resemblance of Hierocles, which begins at that all-important point at which one is ready to live in and through other beings. This is a stage at which the spiritual aspirant realizes that the self one aspires to is not the separative self, but rather the self of all creatures. We must consciously and confidently identify with the mind and heart of all humanity. Immortality can never be a condition of the persona, but equally, it is also not automatically provided to us by nature. It is the natural outcome of the process of radical self-purification, ethical striving, and deep insight into the heart of the cosmos. According to every ancient religious and philosophical tradition, there are beings who have attained to the state of conscious immortality. Think of any great teacher of humanity, from Buddha to Krishna to Shankaracharya to Plato, and all the noted adepts of history. They are all regarded as the paradigm of spiritual freedom, which is just another way we can call conscious immortality. It is a supreme state of freedom from time, from the cycle of incarnations, from all the defects of ordinary human nature, from delusive involvement in the world of matter. Perfected human beings exemplify the highest qualities of human nature, and they point to the possibility that every other human being may so purify themselves that their essential godlike nature is brought forth, which includes magnanimity. In his essay, Death and Immortality, from which we will quote liberally, Professor Iyer begins by asking some very simple questions. Why do we tend to think that death is unnatural? If we're trying to see life as a whole, why don't we instead ask, why were we born? What is the meaning of our birth in this family, to these parents, these brothers or sisters, these relatives? And further, what kind of consciousness can we maintain through the experience of death at its onset and soon after? We can't really begin to answer these questions without seeing the origins of why we are in a body to begin with. Buddhist philosophy explains that life in a body can be traced to the tremendous desire behind it and prior to it. We can readily recognize such a force within ourselves, that which causes us to hold on to life, to our possessions, to our identity with name and form. If we want to understand what happens in death, we need to recognize the forces at work at the end of life. We must first understand, quote unquote, death consciousness, as it's called. What is our state of mind just before we die? Do we willingly meet this new experience without fear? Or are we terrified of the great world of the unknown? Do we put up resistance to death, or do we welcome the discarding of the physical body as a natural opportunity to free consciousness from its prison house? The Buddhist who has learned about the bardo, the intermediate state between death and rebirth, knows that it is a state in which no karma is generated, as karma generated while in a physical body cannot affect one who is without a physical body. So it may not come as a surprise to such a person that soon after the withdrawal from the physical body, he has the opportunity to consider his available vestures and the planes of consciousness consubstantial with them. The soul has an opportunity to perceive the pure body of Dharmakaya, a perception of total undifferentiated consciousness as clear, colorless light. This experience has been reported many times by those who experience the death state, but have been brought back to life again. If we have not thought about this moment during embodied life, we are told, we will not recognize the meaning of what we are seeing. But those truly immortal beings who pass through this state, unaffected, can recognize and make use of those few moments. In the next state of the bardo, as described by Professor Iyer, we see the same Dharmakaya body of the universe, but through a prismatic array of colored light, like a rainbow mist, which results in a dreamy condition of ideal consciousness. It is said that, quote, we now fall into a plane of consciousness where we begin to reflect upon idealized types, the archetypes of Plato. But these archetypes are connected with a personal life that is gone, so that we begin to look back without a clear awareness that we have left the physical body. Then gradually, awareness of this grows, though one still continues to be conscious of one's personal self. Therefore, all one's loves and all one's desires are in terms of the life that went before. And from this point on, we have moved away from the opportunity presented to see the unreality of that personal life. And and then we are confronted with innumerable formulations of elements in our nature with which we have not come to terms, which we have not seen for what they really are and their true colors. Professor Iyer goes on to say that the great opportunity is afforded to all of us. It might be called consulting the book of judgment, the book of memory. Whether we quail before this great and frightening revelation of all of our personal samskaras, our peculiar personal and divisive tendencies, whether we are reattracted to them and are rapidly drawn back to earthly life, or whether we are able to grasp the nirvanic as opposed to the samsaric stream of consciousness, which enables us to see the inwardness of this great panorama, that is the choice open to us. But it cannot be made then, it has to be made during life. Hence the importance of thinking about these teachings about death and the intermediate state of bardo. We should all take the time to think through these issues so that we can make the most of all of our opportunities that both life and death afford us. An effective response to what lies ahead of all of us can only be prepared while we are here in these bodies. But as H.P. Blavatsky says in The Key to Theosophy, one who has no inner perception of and faith in the immortality of his soul, in that man the soul can never become buddhi taijasi, that is, buddhi lit up, buddhi activated, but will remain simply manas, and for manas alone, there is no immortality possible. In order to live in the world to come, a conscious life, one has to believe, first of all, in that life during the terrestrial existence. On these two aphorisms of the secret science, all the philosophy about the postmortem consciousness and the immortality of the soul is built, unquote. Further, she points out that what happens after the dissolution of the body is this. There is either a period of fully awakened consciousness, or there's a state of chaotic dreams, or there's an utterly dreamless sleep of absolute non-consciousness. These are the three kinds of sleep we experience during embodied life, and they are exactly what is experienced in the disembodied state. So she states emphatically, death is sleep. In her answer to the inquirer's question of whether my conscious terrestrial I will perish not only for a time, like the consciousness of the materialist, but so entirely as to leave no trace behind. And she answers, according to the teaching, it must so perish, and in its fullness, all except the principle which, having united itself with the monad, has thereby become a purely spiritual and indestructible essence, one with it in the eternity. But in the case of an out-and-out materialist, in whose personal I no buddhi has ever reflected itself, how can the latter carry away into eternity one particle of that terrestrial personality? Excuse me. Your spiritual I is immortal, but from your present self, it can carry away into eternity that only which has become worthy of immortality, namely the aroma alone of the flower that has been mown by death, unquote. So let's conclude with these words from Professor Iyer. Most human beings are unable to attain the seed of enlightenment, which is fructified in the form of an imperishable vesture by those who have fully prepared before death to enter into the state of immortality. For most people, even the seed idea of immortality cannot be grasped, and therefore they are quickly drawn to all the various samskaras or attributes which come back to them. Merely accumulating a great deal of fantastic knowledge does not add anything to our meditation on death. In the moment we start with ourselves and ask not why we are afraid of death, but why we hold on to life, the moment we begin to see significant correct connections, it will be possible for us to discern that at all times we have available to us either the standpoint of nirvana or the standpoint of samsara. If we are ready to see this, we can come to understand those who have gained or can gain immortality in the scheme of things. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John, for this wonderful presentation on conscious immortality. I'm thinking that maybe I will start out by sharing a little bit of the experience that I had by reading Edward Bellamy's article that I'm so glad that you provided to us as a brief but really potent quote at the beginning. Part of that article speaks of us as having kind of a second self. I think he may call it even a second soul that is always watching, that is always looking upon us in moments of greatest gaiety or darkest despair. And it's still watching, and it's still untouched. And it's changeless, as you were mentioning. And when I read this as someone in her late teens or early 20s who had been brought up within a household of an atheist and an agnostic, some exposure to different religions and so on, but like if we believed in anything, it was kind of frowned upon because that was being weak and just, succumbing to different religions that were trying to capture our consciousness, I think. So that was my background. And then when I read that article about this watching self or soul, I just went, I've had that experience. I know what that experience is like. I have something that's always been watching ever since I was as tiny as I can remember, the earliest memories I have, and all the changes in my life that had happened up to that point. And there has always been something watching. That was so revelatory to me that such a thing might exist. And then eventually, as I contemplated it, and I have a rather logical bent. Science makes sense. And I thought about that point that you were making about a line can only extend infinitely in both directions. You can't have half a line extending forward into the future without the other half extending infinitely into the past. So just from that standpoint of first experience of this ever watching entity or something, and then the logic, mathematical logic of that, whatever that was, that ray of light must go on infinitely. It just opened for me such a larger sense of self than I had ever had in the past. And then from there, I went to, well, if I'm having this experience, surely everyone else can have this experience. Maybe like me, they didn't realize they were having that experience because they hadn't read Edward Bellamy or something else hadn't awakened them to it yet. And so then I began realizing, well, everybody else has this infinite line. And when I thought of those lines as light, then rays of light. How can any ray of light be separate from any other ray of light? And so then it just made the universe made a lot more sense to me. And it was just from Edward Bellamy making the point that there was something that's always watching our life. So I am really to which you went into this conversation. I'm just really grateful. You brought things from so many other perspectives, so many different philosophical, religious, spiritual traditions. I'm really grateful. But I just wanted to make that personal kind of comment to allow others to comment or ask questions from there.
Well, Renee, you must have also been ripe for encountering that idea too. You know, you were ready for it. So.
Yeah, I mean, I am grateful, for example, that my parents had us go to Unitarian Church, and I was exposed to lots of different religious and cultural traditions, philosophical traditions. So that was helpful. And I don't know, it must have been the right thing for me at the right time. Dishen, you have a thought you might want to share?
Actually, many different thoughts. And one of the questions that comes in my mind is, I think one line I wrote over here was, humans have tendencies and egos, and when you try to serve from a specific identity, it won't be holistic. I think John said that line in a way. And one of the questions I had was that through life, we do experience different moments which allows us to see life from a higher perspective. And some of it we may understand, some of it may realize it in the future. And the question I have is how can one should one be aiming for that infinite beginning and endless ray of light? Is it to have an holistic view of something? Because unless and until you have that holistic view, how can you actually help humanity without being able to experience something like that? Is it futile, or is it or it's part of an evolution journey that you have to go through smaller stages and still keep focusing on the light, irrespective of the journey where you are?
Well,
You
go ahead, Renee.
Can you restate that just a little bit shorter, the condensed question?
Yeah, the question is, one, how do you keep moving forward, even without knowing that you don't necessarily have the infinite view of the universe?
So how do you keep moving forward if you don't have a clear conception of the infinitude of the universe? Well, we just do. We keep moving forward. We act on the best knowledge that we have, and our intuitions, our reason, and our experience, and we use those to test the truth of our ideas and to see whether or not they accord with the first principles we've chosen, the things that we've discovered in our life as being true. So it's a series of progressive awakenings, as HPV says, It's not, you don't need to understand infinity before you get there. It's understanding yourself and the laws of your own being. Now, that means karma. That means understanding the meaning of events that happen to you. Everything that happens to each of us happens under law. They are the exact consequences of actions that we set in motion in the past. So one of the axiomatic principles in theosophy and in Buddhism and Hinduism is there is no accident in nature. There's no accident in our lives. Everything happens as the exact consequence of what we've done. And karma exists. It is the law, so to speak. It is the action of deity. That's how it's expressed in some Hindu philosophies. It is the action of, it's deity in action, put it that way. And the idea of karma is that what is behind it is the compassionate heart of the universe, that all consequences as they come to us are meant to help us learn how to operate the law, how to sacrifice, how to not hold on to things in the material universe, how to move towards the light. So we need to look very carefully at everything that happens in our day. And the Pythagoreans had what is called the Pythagorean review. And Pythagoras had, in his golden verses, one of the, I think number 4 was, don't let sleep close your eyes until you have 3 times reflected on everything that you have done during the day and everything that's happened to you. The 3 times, I mean, most of us have difficulty doing that once thoroughly. But the practice in the Pythagorean Academy was for all the initiates who were serious spiritual aspirants to carry out that practice of a review, 3 reviews. And the idea was to subject your actions to the light of reason, the light of our higher from the standpoint of the higher reason, not the personal calculating rational mind, but the eternal perceiver and thinker. And as Hierocles says in his commentary, that by recollecting one's day as a practice over a long period of time, it will naturally lead to the ability to recollect our immortal lives, what has gone before. So he's saying that perfection in this practice has this rather astounding result of bringing back memories from previous lives. This is establishing a level of continuity, and that's the continuity that we try to replicate in the lower nature by these practices that already exists for the immortal self, so to speak. So that's what the divine resemblance is of Hierocles and the Pythagoreans, to replicate what is true as above, but replicate that below, as above, so below. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? I think we can be fairly fearless here, guys. I don't have nearly John's philosophical acumen. I can't go to the depths that he can, but I have life experiences, and that's what Gems from the Wisdom Traditions is about, is we all have our own lived wisdom. And that comes, from a soul level of what we have as human beings, really deeply assimilated. And that becomes available to us as we move forward in life. And that's what this whole conversation is to pull out, as each of our own life wisdom. We all have it. Carolyn.
So this is very instructive in the aim and experience of conscious immortality for and by yourself. But we're supposed to be building upon the experience of brotherhood. So what I'm wondering is, isn't everybody's experience with the path towards conscious immortality unique and different? And so we don't necessarily make any progress towards a universal unity in which we actually come closer to one another, or can make peace with one another, or can just how do you get you might say, where in this, what's been said this evening, where do you get some semblance of unity and brotherhood despite the uniqueness of everyone's aim and experience?
So
I think I'd like to
you
throw
go
it.
ahead. Go ahead, Renee.
Yeah, I just want to throw it out to the group. What do you think? How can we both progress towards this immortality and also do it collectively? How can this what sounds like could be a path for towards something like personal salvation? How can that be done on behalf of the whole? Cliff?
My thoughts aren't completely formulated. I mean, there's a lot to assimilate here in this afternoon's talk, but that statement from Bellamy that we are now living our immortal lives, it just hits like hitting a bell. It just has a resonance to it that we all want to kind of agree to that, but it's like, but the title for today's talk is Conscious Immortality. How do we really become conscious of our immortality? I think we believe, maybe most of us, that there is some element of us that is longer lasting than just the single life. But it's that question of continuity. How do we gain that? But what you were saying, Renee, about reading Edward Bellamy is you were aware of this witness element in yourself. And I think all of us have that experience, that there is this other, we have a dual nature, that there's this part of us that's always changing, and there's this other part of us that's not changing. And that changeless part of us, that witness, that perceiver, that spectator, has to be what would be the immortal part of our nature. But I was wondering, John, too, this idea of the nightly review when we do that and we ask these questions 3 times, if in a way, when we're doing that, we're trying to position ourselves in that more witness side of our nature. And that side of our nature is also the chooser in a way. Like when you ask yourself, well, how did I do today? You ask yourself, what were my bad choices and what were my good choices and what were the consequences of my choices? But it's a process, it seems, by which we withdraw from the the fluxum of life or whatever, and all the chaoticness of it, and try and get to this point where things are quite a bit stiller and we're able to observe things from a much more detached spectator view. And I'm wondering also, Carolyn, to kind of talk to your point about brotherhood, is it as we get more to this deeper side of our nature that would probably be that immortal part of ourselves, if it has a continuity with others. In other words, if we are able to reside in our witness self, if we are much more able to experience brotherhood and relate to and be in harmony with everyone else who also has the same witness quality.
Well, and one of the tests, Cliff, of whether we're going in the right direction, meaning in the direction of universal brotherhood towards the self of all, is our sense of separateness diminishing? Do we feel less sense of separation from other human beings? Can we live through their eyes and through their experiences? Or do we always have to keep, putting ourselves first, putting ourselves out there as, yes, Bob.
Oh, no, just on that same point, it struck me that during your talk, you mentioned that Buddhism talks about there being no separate self. And that's true. But the Buddha also said there's no separate other, that we're all interconnected in an intimate way. And so when Cliff was talking, I resonated with his term of resonance with the bell. And that is how, that interconnection of everything works to some extent, I think, not by separating ourselves, but also not by separating the other. So I wonder if that can be part of getting to brotherhood, as Carolyn was asking.
Yeah, good question.
Mhm.
Well, it all has to do with expanding, drawing the larger circle, expanding your sense of self in larger and larger and larger circles till we can, we need to keep moving towards a universal sense of self, if you will, which would mean a sense of self without boundaries. Now, that's hard to understand because how do you have a sense of individuality? How do you have individuality if you are a universal being? But there are such beings like Krishna, the Buddha. They are universal beings. They have an individuality at the same time. So there are things that are paradoxically true that we can't really understand with our finite minds, but it must be true at a higher level. There are lots of things that are mysteries to us now.
Jade or Dishan?
I just wanted to share, I think on the same lines that I think there are 3 values that I feel that has served me to get closer to be able to function from that light. It is truth, compassion, and spontaneity. When I allow myself to put my mind, body, and heart in those values, it allows me to see the compassion in others while serving, but at the same time being deeply engaged in the truth, the wisdom that you may have learned in your journey. And clubbed with the spontaneity, which is keeping your routines away and just being spontaneous in the moment, being present in the moment. And that's how it's a logical framework which just allows me to serve the brotherhood in that moment. And I feel it might be different for different people. So I just wanted to hear something around those lines.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question for Jade in this regard. I know that you so love to spend time in nature, and you set aside a lot of space in your lives for that to happen. And I'm just wondering whether you somehow, like you've told me about watching butterflies and birds and flowers and all kinds of things in nature, if somehow you maybe feel more of a continuity with the rest of the universe through those experiences, something like that.
Thank you. For me, I'm speaking from the moment that I feel all things have come from nature. All the gifts and blessings and serendipities that we get to experience are all gifts from nature. And it may be called different things for different people. It may be called God for some, or the universe, or nature. And for me, I know as much as we are one with nature, nature is inside of each and every one of us. And for some, it may be called the conscious immortality. If I ask myself, who am I? I'm not this body. There is an observer or a commander that is beyond me, that lives, that will transcend time, like this beautiful pledge of identity that you both shared. And this, if you weigh a body while it's alive and after death, the body is a miracle, but it's gonna weigh the same. There's a observer that is beyond the body. And I just try to be as one as possible with nature, and try to be a vessel for it, to speak through me, to be through me, and put aside the ego, anything that edges ego, anything that edges God out, or universe out, or nature out.
Thank you so much. Natalia, I'm so glad that we can see you this week. It's lovely to have you join us. Is there something you'd like to share?
No, it's not that easy to share because I have so many thoughts. This discussion is so thought-provoking that I'm just thinking. Some of my questions have been answered during the questions and answers period, but this way to perfection, to development, is something that is, I think, not so framed, not so worded, not so stipulated. What that is, what does that mean for every one of us? And as you mentioned, collectively and individually. For this, perhaps we have to establish some kind of framework that might determine that, but that's not that easy. That's next to impossible. Because all religions, they have something in common that unites all those virtues and all those perfections, imperfections, etc. But I don't think all of us have the same idea of our way to immortality, to eternity, etc. So that's too complicated.
Do you want to share with us your own idea of a way to immortality that we can just call your idea? We don't have to make sure that it conforms with anyone else's whatsoever.
Yeah, that's difficult.
Okay. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
sharing that much with us. Really. Yeah.
Thank you. That's my pleasure.
Mary, I'm not sure whether you're available to talk. I know we don't have a screen for you today, but do you have anything you'd like to add from the Christian or Catholic perspective?
Thank you, John. It was interesting. I'm still wrapping my head around it. When you talk about immortality, from my Catholic upbringing and what I continue to learn, is that God loved us before we were even born. So we'll continue, even though our bodies may not be here, but our spirits will always be here. Amen.
Thank you, Mary. However far back that went, before we were born, we were loved. And God is infinite. I guess that says a lot. Thank you.
Yes.
How about Donna? Or maybe Carolyn was going to say something.
No, I was trying to send a chat, but I just failed again. So anyway, I have to leave now, but thank you. Thank you, John, and thank you all of
Yeah, you're welcome. Actually, your chat did come around, Carolyn, so it's in the chat box.
Oh, okay. Maybe the first time I've been successful at that.
Maybe we'll call it the God box then.
Good luck. Have a good week.
Thank you, Carolyn. Oh my gosh, we're past 4 o'clock. I just realized. All right. I'll go ahead and let you know what we're doing next week, and then I'll swing back around and ask who might like to give a vote of thanks to John today. Next week we are taking up the theme Passion to Compassion. The theme for the week will be from the Dalai Lama. It is important not to confuse attachment with compassion. A compassionate thought is motivated by the wish to help release beings from their misery. And for that talk, we have Ana Morales, who's been a yoga teacher for Still Moving Center for a couple of years now, and she's going to speak to us from the yogic perspective. So swinging around, does somebody want to give John a vote of thanks? Because I'm always happy to do it.
I'd be happy to do it, Renee, just because I'm immensely grateful. So maybe that's enough. I don't know. But there's no doubt. I look forward to John's talks because he always elevates. He always takes us a little higher. And at the same time, interestingly, for such a wonderful intellect, he makes things accessible, which I think is something he works really hard on. And so I'm always left with questions about, for instance, tonight, I've been thinking a lot lately, and this is in line with Jade, I believe's comment about nature. Been thinking a lot about what it means to look at everything as a gift. It's really kind of a force now in the culture where everyone's talking about gratitude. And it seems like in thinking about gratitude, being grateful, it can really lift you out of yourself and draw the larger circle John was talking about. But it's not so easy to think about what a gift is. I find it very, very difficult, very appealing, and kind of logically, it just makes such total sense. But to live that way, kind of in a daily basis, to look at everything as a gift, there has to be something to it because it's very hard to do. Thank you, John, for leaving me with these conundrums. I appreciate it.
Very welcome, Donna. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for joining us, and especially John. That was a really magnificently formulated presentation. I think last time you gave us maybe the script of your presentation, and I believe it's on our website. So we would love to entertain that again if you'd like to. And we'll look forward to seeing everyone next week. Thank you all so much, and especially John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you all. Thank you all for listening and for helping out. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you, Donna.
Jade, Deshawn, Natalia.
Aloha.
Aloha. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.